Hello, I'm John Garvin, and I'm here to talk a little bit about my new book, The W.L. Evans School of Cartooning and Caricaturing. This is the second book in my History of Cartoon Instruction series. The first one was the C. and Landon School, and this one is kind of a companion book to that. The books are very similar in terms of formatting. They're 8.5 by 11 inches paperback, and this is the same size that all the original course material was originally produced at. So it's being reproduced at the same size that Evans actually printed it when he sent it out to his students. It's got 238 pages. It covers a bunch of Evans's students, and it has all of the material from his original course. So to dig into a little bit about the book itself, I think the interesting thing for me is that it was so hard to find all of this material. So it's not like the Landon material was easy to find, but this course is all these early cartoon courses from the early 1900s have fallen into obscurity, and that's kind of too bad because they influenced an entire generation of cartoonists. And the W. Evans course was 20 lessons, actually, not 19. But the 20th lesson was not printed the same way. It didn't have text pages and graphic plates with drawings. He actually worked one-on-one with his students on that 20th lesson and pretended he was a newspaper editor and would give them feedback directly. So there's really only 19 courses to be reproduced, and I have all of them and a couple of extras too, which I'll get into. So what we don't know a lot about Evans. Again, kind of like with C. and Landon, we know a little bit about his biography, but not a lot. So one of the things in tracking down the course material, I came across his advertisements for his course. And the last one I could find was in 1933. Now, I know Evans lived a lot longer than that. He died in 1959. So I don't know what happened at the end of his course. Did he sell it to someone? Did he stop working on it? Did he just retire it? I don't know. But hopefully maybe that information will come out, and in an updated edition later, we can fill in some of those gaps. What we do know is that Evans and Landon were actually friends. So they had both worked at the Cleveland Leader. They were both editorial cartoonists, and they had actually talked about collaborating on a cartoon course together. So, Zim had done a course, and there were a couple of others at the time they started theirs, but evidently Evans got sick. And so Landon went on without him and founded the Landon School. And then in 2007, Evans founded his. So they started out as, hey, we could collaborate on this, and then they become really fierce competitors. So it's kind of interesting. If you read through all their advertisements, they kind of hint at each other, and and there's some sort of gentle barbs kind of thrown back and forth. But the two men knew each other. They lived in the same town. They worked in the same building at one point when they were working on their cartoon school even. So I think that's fascinating. I think there's a bigger story to be told there, but I cover as much as I know. And that's that, the courses were very similar in terms of, hey, the format, the size, because this is the Landon course, this is the Evans course, this is the federal school, one of their big competitors at the time. And it feels way more like a textbook. It's these tiny 6x9 booklets that are dense with text, and they're laid out and with formal typography and all that. And it just feels very, very different than the Evans School and the Landon School, which felt very much more like, hey, this is a newspaper assignment, go out and do this drawing. So there's a kind of charm to these two courses that the other courses in the period sort of lack. So they have that in common, but beyond that, they're pretty different. And again, I think part of it has to do with Evans' style is just very, very different. His course overall, and I go into detail about this, is just way less organized. And, sometimes it was hard to figure out what the lesson was about. So there were a few lessons in here where, like in the table of contents, I just kind of like, hey, I think this is about, anatomy or whatever, because he didn't title his lesson. So it wasn't really clear sometimes the point of what he was trying to teach. I think he makes up for that in having a way more, I think, looser and more expressive style than Landon. So Landon's drawings seem to me to be sort of more rigid and stiff and maybe a little less a little less fluid than Evans. So still, there's no question that they both have an impressive list of students, and and I kind of cover that in as much detail as I could find. So there's some huge names on here. You're going to recognize, of course, Hank Ketcham, who did Dennis the Menace, E.C. Segar, who did Popeye, Chester Gould, who did Dick Tracy, and a bunch of others. Obviously, there's a bunch of obscure names on this list as well. Newspaper editorial artists from tiny regional newspapers, that sort of thing. Impossible to find their work. So, I've done what I can, and I try to have, examples of each of those students' work where I could find it. The other thing I tried to find was examples of Evans' work, because, again, as one of the founding and pioneering cartoon instructors, his work should be remembered just for that. But he was also a really well-known, cartoonist. I managed to find a really obscure book about dentistry, and he had some cartoons in that. So I reprinted those. But yeah, it's tough to find his work. He's literally fallen into obscurity, and that's kind of a shame. I did, however, manage to find examples from the work of many of his students. So again, not all, but some, and you're going to recognize some of these. And it was just kind of fun putting that together and see, oh, wow, this guy studied under Evans, and this guy did, and this guy did. Fascinating stuff. I also reprinted this great article written by Bruce Schultz, who runs a Facebook page on Popeye, and he's been a Popeye collector forever. So we got in touch decades ago when I was doing research for the Landon book, and he gave me permission to reprint this article that he had written. And it's literally it's a glimpse into how Evans corresponded with his early students and how he followed up with them. So it's just fascinating material. So Segar used to run this thing called the Popeye School of Cartooning, or the Cartoon Club. And it was a way for Segar to interact with his fans, and they would send him in cartoons, and he would print some of them. And what Evans would do is he would sort of glom onto those guys and send them a letter and say, hey, that's a decent cartoon you got there, David Kenner, and how would you like to join my school? So, he would use that as a way to pick up new students for his class. So all that material is all here. So Bruce managed to find this stuff. I don't know where. But he writes about the interaction with Kenner and Segar and Evans, and we have copies of the letters that Evans would send out, not just to try to talk him into the course, but we have him corresponding with this kid's parents, and setting up payments, and then kind of following through to see how the coursework is going, and so on. So as Bruce says in his article, we don't know how it turned out. We don't know if Kenner ever became a well-known cartoonist or not. That the story's incomplete, but it's a fascinating glimpse into not just this kid in the cartoon school, but also Segar, and how he and Evans evidently maintained close contact over the years. So really, really good stuff. And then, of course, we have the actual course, and all of this material, like I mentioned earlier, is tough to track down because it's just not available. It's like not very many people hung on to this material, and certainly not in a complete state. So I managed to find almost complete copy, and I managed to track down some missing material from a university collection. And so I do have the complete course here, and I have it all scanned in at 300 dots per inch, and it's all reproduced exactly as Evans originally printed it and sent it out. Now, the exception to that is I have combined some text elements onto a single page to save printing costs and to cut down on the weight of the book. But other than that, the material is there. I haven't edited out any of the material at all. And if you wanted to take the course, you're not going to get feedback, obviously, but you could definitely get a sense of what it would take in Evans' style to become a cartoonist and a successful cartoonist for newspapers. So some really, really, really good material if you're just interested in the history of it, or if you're literally interested in taking the course yourself, or if you want to just compare and contrast Evans and Landon, because as I said, they were fierce competitors and their styles were pretty different. So you can, so between the two books, you get a pretty good glimpse at, who the two major players were in the early 1900s in terms of cartoon, teaching cartoons and teaching how to draw cartoons. I think one of the things that I found super fascinating is we have feedback that he gave to somebody who became a really popular and famous for his time, at least, cartoonist, Oz Black. So again, we have the original plates that Oz had sent in. Again, it's a miracle that this stuff survived. And then we have Landon, or I'm sorry, Evans's actual feedback, the things that he wrote to him to give him feedback on his lessons. So that was a nice find and a nice addition to the material. The other thing we have is that towards the end of early 1920s, Evans added this material about animation. So it's a completely separate course that he added into his course on cartooning. And what's interesting about this is in the research I found that there was an animator, William Nolan, who had taken Evans's course, and then somehow I think he did a cartoon animation course of his own. And we have evidence that some of the animators, and maybe even Walt Disney himself, had taken the Evans course on cartooning and how to draw animated cartoons. So it's again, it's super dated material. You're not going to learn how to animate by reading this material, but for historians of animation and cartooning and sort of the evolution of early animation, because it was getting started in the early 1920s, fascinating material. And then I saw in an advertisement from the early 1920s that Evans had put in his advertisement that at the request of editors for newspapers across the country, for more practical things on graphic design that had really very little to do with actual cartooning and the skill of cartooning. And so he added this other whole course called commercial cartooning, and it covers things like how to do stencils and mimeographs, and just working with as if you're setting up some kind of a graphic design shop in a small town and you're offering all kinds of services. So my guess is, again, he may have been running out of cartoon students. I mean, who knows? I don't really know. But he gives, again, this is all very dated by today's standards, but kind of fascinating to see the kinds of things that people needed to know if they were going to do graphic design in the 1920s. So that pretty much covers most of the material in the book. Again, I've got all kinds of samples from Evans's students. Some of them are really well known. And, it was fun to be able to put all that material together to try to get a sense of like how diverse the careers were that these guys went on to have. So that, it's fun to read through, and it's fun to sort of compare the success of Landon students with Evans students. And, there's just a lot to go over and look at in this book. So a lot of fun to work on. I think if you're interested at all in the history of cartooning, or the history of these important cartoonists who learn from these guys, and especially if you don't have the Landon School or the Evans School, man, I can't recommend enough that you take a look through this material, because it's really worth your time. Just go to it's for sale now, enchantedimages.com, and again, it's available, and I'm shipping it out just as soon as I get orders. So thanks for watching, and if you enjoy the material, check it out, and thanks a lot.